The knock came at exactly midnight, soft at first, almost swallowed by the wind that swept across the open plains, but persistent enough to pull. Caleb Rourke from the half-sleep he'd lived in since grief hollowed his nights. The widowed rancher sat up in bed, heart pounding. Lantern light flickering shadows across the rough-hewn walls of his ranch house. No one ever came out here after dark. No one except trouble. He reached for his boots, slid them on, and grabbed the old shotgun that had belonged to his father. Another knock followed, small, weak, desperate. When he opened the door, the night air rushed in, carrying dust, cold, and fear. Standing on his porch was a little girl, no older than 7, barefoot, her nightdress torn at the hem, eyes wide with terror and shining tears. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Mister, Mama needs help." Caleb's breath caught. The girl looked like she might collapse at any moment, and without thinking, he knelt, setting the shotgun aside. "Easy now," he said gently, though his own voice shook. "Where's your mama?" She pointed back toward the darkness, toward the hills where abandoned, homesteads and forgotten roads, twisted into nothing. "She's sick, real sick. She told me to knock on the light." Caleb followed her finger and realized she meant his ranch, the only place for miles with lanterns burning at night, a habit he'd kept since his wife died, as if light could keep the world from falling apart again. He hesitated only a moment before lifting the girl into his arms. "What's your name?" "Lila." "All right, Lila," he said, already striding inside. "We'll get her help." He lit every lantern he owned, one after another, the warm glow spreading across the yard like hope itself. As he saddled his horse and wrapped Lila in a blanket, memories surged. His wife coughing in the dark, the helplessness, the prayers that went unanswered. He refused to let history repeat itself. They rode fast, the lanterns swinging from the saddle casting long, dancing shadows across the land. Lila clung to him, her small fingers gripping, his coat as if he were the last solid thing in a breaking world. When they reached the shack hidden among the rocks, Caleb knew instantly how bad it was. The woman inside burned with fever, her breathing shallow, her skin clammy. He worked through the night, using every skill he had learned from years of ranch injuries and hard living, cooling her, feeding her water, whispering encouragement even when she couldn't hear. As dawn crept in, pale and quiet, the fever broke. The woman slept, and Lila cried softly into Caleb's chest, not from fear this time, but relief. Standing there in the growing light, Caleb felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, purpose, and as the sun rose, he didn't yet know that the knock at midnight had just changed his life forever. If this story is touching your heart so far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this remind us that even in the darkest nights, one light can save a life. The days that followed unfolded like a slow healing, not just for Lila's mother, whose name was Mara, but for Caleb himself. Mara woke weak but alive. Her first words a hoarse whisper of gratitude that left Caleb staring at the floor, uncomfortable with praise he didn't feel he deserved. He brought them back to his ranch, insisting they stay until she regained her strength. Lila followed him everywhere, her laughter slowly replacing the fear that once lived in her eyes. Each evening, as the sun dipped low, Caleb lit the lanterns again, and now they meant something different, not mourning, but welcome. Word spread quietly across the plains about the widowed rancher, who helped strangers in the night, and travelers began stopping by, drawn by the glow. Caleb found himself cooking for others, fixing wagons, listening to stories by firelight. The loneliness he had worn like a second skin began to loosen its grip. One night, Lila asked him why he always kept the lights on. He told her about his wife, about how he was afraid of the dark after she left. Lila thought for a moment, then said maybe the lights stayed on so we could find you. The words hit him, harder than any loss ever had. Mara healed fully, and when the time came for her and Lila to leave, the ranch felt unbearably quiet again, but only for a moment. Mara stopped at the door, tears in her eyes, and asked if they could stay. Not as guests, as family. Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at the lanterns, at the land, at the little girl who had knocked on his door and unknowingly knocked life back into his heart. Then he nodded. Years later, people would still talk about the ranch where the lights never went out, where a man who had lost everything found it again because he answered a knock at midnight, and every time the lanterns were lit. It was a reminder that hope often arrives small, shaking, and brave enough to ask for help. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the power of kindness, make sure to subscribe to the channel because more stories like this are waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss the next light in the darkness. The seasons turned, and with them the ranch, transformed from a lonely outpost into a place of quiet gravity, as if the land itself had decided to breathe again. Caleb rose before dawn each morning, not because grief pushed him out of bed anymore, but because life waited. Lila insisted on helping with everything, trailing behind him with determined steps, learning the names of tools, animals, and stars. Mara worked alongside him once her strength returned, her presence steady and calm, filling spaces that had long echoed empty. At night, the lanterns burned brighter than ever, their glow visible from miles away. One storm-heavy evening, a rider appeared out of the rain, wounded from a fall, barely conscious. Caleb and Mara worked together without a word, moving as if they had always known how to do this side by side. When the man survived, word spread faster than before. The ranch became a refuge, first for the lost, then for the broken, then for those who simply needed rest. Caleb sometimes stood on the porch late at night, listening to laughter drift from inside, wondering how a single knock had undone years of sorrow. He realized then that pain doesn't vanish. It transforms when shared. And as the lanterns flickered against the dark, Caleb understood something simple and profound. The light was no longer for him alone. If this chapter is drawing you deeper into the story, take a moment to subscribe because the journey is only growing stronger from here. Trouble came the way it always does, quiet at first. A land baron from the south laid claim to the surrounding territory, threatening to drive off anyone who didn't bow or sell. Fear crept into the nights, but the lanterns stayed lit. When riders loyal to the baron arrived, they expected a broken widower. Instead, they found a man backed by a community forged in kindness. Travelers he had helped returned. Neighbors he barely knew stood shoulder to shoulder. Even Lila stood tall, holding a lantern with both hands, her small face fierce. Caleb spoke calmly, firmly, refusing to abandon the land that had become a beacon for so many. The standoff ended not with bloodshed, but with resolve the baron could not break. As the riders retreated, Caleb felt something settle inside him, a certainty that love and courage, once lit, are impossible to extinguish. That night, the lanterns burned until dawn, not as a warning, but as a promise. If stories of resilience and quiet strength matter to you, subscribe to the channel because these are the stories that stay with us. Years later, people would still find their way to the ranch, guided by light and rumor. Lila grew strong and compassionate, carrying the same courage that once drove her to knock on a stranger's door. Mara's laughter became the sound that greeted the evenings, and Caleb, once a man hollowed by loss, stood whole. On the anniversary of that midnight knock, they lit every lantern together, lining the fences, the porch, the hills beyond. Caleb told the story not as a tale of rescue, but of connection, how one small voice asking for help had awakened a heart and changed countless lives. As darkness settled over the plains, the ranch glowed like a constellation fallen to earth. And somewhere out there, someone lost would see the light and know where to go. If this story has stayed with you, if it reminded you that hope often begins with a single brave moment, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story where light overcomes the dark.